The room smelled like burnt coffee and polished oak when the CEO leaned back in his chair and smiled the way people do right before they destroy someone publicly. 5 minutes, he said. Pack your things. Nobody moved. Not the executives, not HR, not even the assistant typing notes with trembling fingers. But Elena did something strange. She opened her laptop, clicked once, saved the email thread, then another file, then the calendar invite marked confidential, council discussion. Only after that did she stand up. Calm, precise, almost elegant. The rain outside dragged silver lines across the glass walls, while $20 million worth of tailored suits watched her leave the boardroom carrying a single leather folder. They thought the story ended there. At 6:12 a.m., corporate counsel opened a document labeled Section 14 Retaliation Review, and suddenly nobody in the executive wing was drinking coffee anymore. The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor lasted 43 seconds. Elena counted every one of them. Not because she was nervous. Nervous people fidgeted. Nervous people explained themselves. Nervous people begged in hallways outside executive conference rooms while assistants avoided eye contact and security pretended not to listen. Elena simply stood there with one hand on the leather folder pressed against her side. 43 seconds. The mirrored elevator walls reflected the same image from 3 angles: charcoal gray blazer, loosened dark hair, unreadable expression. Only her eyes betrayed movement. Cold, alert, calculating faster than the elevator numbers descending one by one. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She ignored it. By the time the doors opened into the marble lobby, the story had already started mutating upstairs. She threatened leadership. She became unstable. She violated protocol. She was emotional. Corporations moved faster than wildfires when reputation was involved. Facts arrived later, usually exhausted and too late to matter. Outside, evening rain soaked the city in reflections. Red brake lights smeared across wet pavement like watercolor paint, dragged by impatient hands. The financial district glowed behind fogged glass and steel, beautiful in the same sterile way luxury hospitals were beautiful. Elena stepped beneath the awning and finally checked her phone. 3 missed calls, 1 from HR, 2 from Martin Keller, CEO. She almost laughed. 5 minutes earlier, he had dismissed her in front of 12 executives like a waitress who spilled wine. Now he was calling personally. Interesting. A Blacktown car rolled past, spraying water onto the curb. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and dissolved into traffic noise. The city continued breathing, indifferent as always. Her phone buzzed again. This time a message appeared. Martin Keller, you will not discuss internal matters with anyone. Council will contact you regarding your severance package. Elena stared at the screen for 2 silent seconds. Then she pressed and held the message. Screenshot, saved. Another vibration arrived almost instantly. Martin Keller, do not make this harder than it needs to be. There it was, the real voice. Not the polished conference stage visionary from magazine covers. Not the charismatic titan smiling beside innovation awards and charity checks. Pressure always revealed architecture, like storms exposing weak roofs. And Martin Keller was beginning to crack. Elena slid the phone into her coat pocket and started walking. Her heels clicked sharply against wet concrete. Fast, controlled, the rhythm of someone refusing to collapse publicly. 3 blocks later, she entered a narrow cafe tucked between a closed bookstore and an antique watch repair shop. Warm yellow light spilled across dark wooden tables. Jazz hummed softly beneath the noise of steaming milk and ceramic cups. Nobody here knew who she was. Perfect. She ordered black coffee and chose the back corner beside the window. The kind of table people used for breakups in private negotiations. For the first time since the meeting, she opened the leather folder. Inside sat less than 30 pages, enough to destroy a billion-dollar reputation. Emails, internal approvals, expense authorizations, legal objections quietly overridden, dates highlighted in pale blue ink, tiny details executives assumed assistants and directors never noticed. But Elena noticed everything. That had always been her problem. Or her talent, depending on who was speaking. She took out the final document carefully. A printout. Subject line, RE, retaliation exposure, delay formal review. Her eyes stopped on the sentence she already knew by memory. If she escalates this to counsel before Q4 close, we contain and terminate immediately. No names in the body. But Martin Keller had replied personally 6 minutes later. Handled. Outside the cafe window, rainwater streamed down the glass in trembling lines. Pedestrians hurried through the storm with lowered heads and glowing phone screens. Normal people finishing normal evenings. Meanwhile, somewhere above the skyline, executives were probably still sitting around polished walnut tables, deciding how to erase her professionally before sunrise. Elena sipped her coffee slowly. Still warm, still steady. That was what unsettled men like Martin. Not anger, not revenge, composure, because calm people looked dangerous. Calm people suggested preparation. Her laptop opened with a soft metallic click. Password, folder, upload complete, encrypted backup sent. A second copy scheduled automatically for release if anything happened to the primary files. She leaned back slightly as the screen reflected in her eyes. Done. The cafe door opened behind her. Cold air drifted inside, carrying rain and city exhaust. Someone entered wearing a navy overcoat. Tall, broad shoulders, expensive shoes wet from the storm. Elena didn't turn immediately, but she saw him in the reflection of the window. Daniel Reeves, Deputy General Counsel. Interesting timing. Very interesting. He scanned the cafe once before spotting her in the corner. His expression didn't change, but his pace slowed half a step. The subtle hesitation of someone realizing a situation had become larger than expected. He approached carefully. Elena. Counselor. You left quickly. I was given 5 minutes. A pause. The waitress passed between them carrying plates that smelled of butter and garlic. Somewhere near the counter, a spoon struck porcelain with a tiny, sharp sound. Daniel glanced at the folder on the table, then at her laptop, then back to her face. You've already copied everything, haven't you? Elena stirred her coffee once. You came here hoping I hadn't. Silence. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river. Daniel exhaled slowly and removed his rain-soaked coat. That alone told her everything. He wasn't here to intimidate her. He was here because the building upstairs had started panicking. And panic inside executive leadership spread faster than blood and water. Martin says you violated confidentiality, Daniel said carefully. Elena smiled for the first time that evening. Small, sharp. Martin also deleted retention notices last Tuesday. Are we discussing all violations tonight or only mine? Daniel froze, just for a second. But seconds mattered, especially to lawyers, especially to observant women sitting quietly in dim cafes, while billion-dollar corporations began realizing they had fired the wrong employee. And upstairs, 42 floors above the rain-soaked streets, someone was probably already asking the most dangerous question possible. What exactly does she have? By 9:40 p.m., the executive floor no longer looked like a place where innovation happened. It looked like a hospital corridor before bad news reached a family. Conference room lights stayed on behind smoked glass walls. Assistants walked faster than usual. Nobody laughed. Nobody lingered near coffee stations pretending to network. Even the cleaning crew sensed the tension and kept their heads down. On the far end of the floor, Martin Keller stood beside the panoramic windows of his office, gripping a crystal tumbler so tightly the ice had stopped moving. The city stretched beneath him in silver and black geometry. Usually that view calmed him. Tonight, it felt exposed. You're overreacting, said Vivian Cross from Legal Compliance, though her voice carried none of the confidence her words suggested. Martin turned sharply. Am I? The question cracked through the room harder than shouting would have. Vivian looked away first. 3 other executives sat around the low conference table pretending to review printed reports. Nobody was reading anything. Pages remained untouched beside cooling espresso cups and glowing tablets, because everyone understood the same thing now. Elena hadn't left devastated. She had left organized, and organized people terrified corporations. Martin drained the remainder of his drink and placed the glass down with surgical precision. "What does she actually have?" he asked. No one answered immediately. That silence said more than any report could. Finally, the head of HR cleared his throat. "We still don't know the extent of the archived correspondence." Archived correspondence. Interesting phrase, as if carefully chosen vocabulary could soften potential disaster. Martin's jaw tightened. "You told me legal scrubbed the review chain." "We removed what we could," Vivian replied carefully. What we could. Another dangerous sentence. Rain battered the windows harder now, turning the skyline into blurred neon smears. The storm outside mirrored the atmosphere inside the office perfectly, pressure building quietly before impact. Martin walked toward the conference table. "Listen carefully," he said. "She signed confidentiality agreements, non-disparagement clauses, retention restrictions. If she leaks internal strategy—" "She won't leak strategy," Vivian interrupted softly. That stopped the room. Martin stared at her. Vivian folded her hands slowly, the way experienced attorneys did when preparing to deliver unpleasant truths. "She'll claim retaliation." The word landed heavily. Not loud, heavy, like something metallic dropped deep underwater. One executive actually shifted in his chair. Another removed his glasses and rubbed tired eyes. Because retaliation changed everything. Internal misconduct could sometimes be buried beneath settlements and legal language, but retaliation cases invited scrutiny, discovery, timelines, email recovery, independent review. Sunlight in places powerful people preferred darkness. Martin's expression hardened. "She has no proof." Vivian looked at him for a long second too long. That was answer enough. Meanwhile, 12 blocks away, Elena sat across from Daniel Reeves while the cafe slowly emptied around them. Only 3 occupied tables remained now. A young couple whispering over shared pie, an exhausted delivery driver asleep against the window, and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Nobody under 50 touched anymore. The espresso machine hissed softly. Rain tapped the glass. The world narrowed into shadows and low golden light. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You understand what happens next, right?" Elena looked at him over the rim of her coffee. "Enlighten me." "They'll isolate you first." "They already tried." "No," Daniel said quietly. "This was only the public version." That sentence lingered between them. Cold, measured, professional. Daniel removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man already regretting tomorrow morning. "You'll be painted as unstable, difficult, emotional. Every disagreement from the last 3 years will suddenly become evidence." Elena almost smiled. Predictable, large corporations behave like elegant predators. Beautiful from a distance, primitive up close. "They'll say I mishandled compliance reporting," she said. "Yes." "They'll imply performance concerns." "Yes." "They'll tell people I became disruptive after being denied promotion." Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. There it was again. Confirmation through silence. Elena turned her gaze toward the rain outside. Tiny rivers slid down the cafe window, distorting headlights into liquid gold. The city looked softer through water, less cruel, almost honest. "I kept records," she said calmly. "I know." "No," she replied. "You don't." She opened the folder and slid a single page across the table. Daniel read the heading, then stopped breathing normally. Not dramatically, just enough for her to notice, because attorneys train themselves never to react unless something truly mattered. And this mattered. Printed near the center of the page was an internal timestamp tied to executive authorization routing. Below, it sat Martin Keller's direct approval attached to delayed compliance disclosure. Daniel looked up slowly. "When did you get this?" "The night they assumed I stopped paying attention." That metadata wasn't supposed to be accessible. Elena leaned back slightly. That sounds like an internal systems problem. For the first time that evening, Daniel gave a short, quiet laugh. Not because anything was funny, because the situation had officially crossed into dangerous territory. His phone buzzed. One glance at the screen changed his expression immediately. "Martin." Daniel declined the call. "Interesting. Very interesting." "Elena," he said carefully, lowering his voice further. "You need to understand something. Counsel initiated preliminary review 30 minutes ago." She remained still. And Martin doesn't know yet." Now that was useful. Tiny fractures inside leadership structures often widened overnight, especially when fear entered the bloodstream. "Who initiated it?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the empty counter before answering. "Not HR," which meant legal, which meant someone upstairs had already started protecting themselves. Corporate loyalty lasted exactly until personal liability appeared. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the wet streets in white-blue light for half a second. Daniel slid the document back toward her. "If this escalates formally, executive communications get preserved." Elena closed the folder. "They should have preserved them weeks ago." Another silence. This one heavier, more final. The waitress approached quietly with the check neither of them remembered requesting. Even she seemed careful now, sensing tension without understanding it. Daniel placed cash beneath the receipt holder and stood. "You should prepare for tomorrow." "I already did." "That confidence worries me." Elena gathered the folder slowly. "It should worry Martin more." Daniel studied her face for several seconds. Then he asked the question everyone upstairs was too afraid to ask directly. "How many copies exist?" Elena put on her coat. Rain hammered the windows harder. The cafe lights flickered once, and only then did she answer. "Enough." Back in the tower, on the 42nd floor, Martin Keller finally received the message that changed the temperature of the entire night. Subject: Counsel hold notice. Section 14: Review. His face lost color instantly. Because powerful men feared many things: scandals, shareholders, journalists. But nothing terrified them more than official documentation with timestamps attached. And somewhere deep in the building, printers had already started waking up. If this story already has your pulse climbing, subscribe now, because the next chapter changes everything. The legal hold is active, executives are turning on each other, and Elena is about to discover someone inside the company has been secretly helping her the entire time. One deleted file, one hidden witness, one mistake Martin Keller can no longer erase. At 5:47 a.m., the executive parking garage was already half full. That alone told Elena the company was in crisis mode. Normal executives arrived after sunrise with expensive coffee and curated confidence. Only fear dragged people into corporate towers before dawn. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the city washed clean and colorless beneath a pale gray sky. Water still clung to sidewalks and reflected the sharp white lights of the underground garage. Elena stepped out of the rideshare wearing the same charcoal coat from yesterday. No dramatic reinvention, no visible exhaustion. That unsettled people, too. A security guard near the elevator recognized her instantly. His posture shifted awkwardly, caught between policy and sympathy. "Ma'am, I don't know if your access—" "It still works," Elena replied calmly. She tapped her badge. Green light. The guard frowned. Interesting, very interesting. because access should have been revoked immediately after termination, which meant one of two things. Someone forgot, or someone intentionally kept her active, and billion-dollar corporations rarely forgot anything involving risk. The elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic whisper. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected fluorescent light across polished steel, cold enough to feel surgical. 42 floors again. Only this time the ride felt different. Yesterday, she had descended as a terminated executive. Today, she was returning as a problem. The doors opened directly into silence. No chatter, no distant laughter, no smell of overpriced breakfast catering before investor calls. Just tension, dense and invisible. Assistants avoided eye contact as she crossed the executive floor. Two junior analysts abruptly stopped talking the second they saw her. Someone near the legal department physically turned around and walked the opposite direction. News had spread overnight, not publicly, internally, which was worse, because public scandals damaged stock prices. Internal panic damaged loyalty. Elena reached her former office and stopped. The frosted glass door stood slightly open. Inside, every shelf had already been cleared. Fast work. Her family photo was gone. The framed compliance award disappeared. Even the small ceramic coffee cup she kept beside the monitor had vanished like evidence from a crime scene. Only one thing remained: a single yellow sticky note placed neatly in the center of the empty desk. 3 words. Check your inbox. No signature. No handwriting she recognized immediately. Elena closed the office door behind her slowly. Then she opened her laptop. Still active, definitely intentional. Her inbox loaded with unusual delay before a new encrypted message appeared at the very top. From Internal Relay. Subject: You were right. No sender information, no traceable route, just one attachment. For half a second, even Elena hesitated. Not from fear, from instinct. Because moments like this change trajectories, careers, lives, entire legal outcomes balanced on tiny decisions people almost made casually. Outside her office, footsteps moved quickly through the hallway. Phones rang. Somewhere nearby, a printer spat pages nonstop like a machine panicking mechanically. Elena clicked the attachment. A spreadsheet opened. At first glance, it looked harmless. Expense routing, departmental approvals, quarterly allocations. Then she saw the hidden tab, and her pulse finally changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The tab contained private authorization logs tied to executive legal overrides, names, timestamps, deleted review flags, and one line highlighted in red: compliance escalation disabled, authorized by M. Keller below. It sat the date, 3 days before she was terminated. Elena stared at the screen while morning light slowly brightened the windows behind her. This wasn't negligence anymore. This was intent. The office door opened suddenly. "Jesus Christ," whispered Daniel Reeves. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. The kind of face attorneys developed after nights involving emergency conference calls and phrases like exposure assessment. He stepped inside quickly and shut the door behind him. "You came back." "My badge still worked." Daniel muttered something under his breath that sounded dangerously close to panic. They weren't supposed to leave access active. So it wasn't an accident. He didn't answer, which answered perfectly. Daniel noticed the spreadsheet still open on her screen. His expression changed immediately. "Where did you get that?" "Anonymous gift." He moved closer, reading faster with every line. Then he went completely still. There it was again. That lawyer's silence. The kind that appeared when professionals suddenly recalculated personal survival odds. "This file wasn't in retention," he said quietly. "And yet here it is." Daniel looked toward the closed office blinds instinctively, lowering his voice even further. "Elena, if this metadata authenticates, Martin personally bypassed escalation review." "He did. You sound very certain." She turned toward him slowly. "Because I warned him not to." The air in the office seemed thinner suddenly. Outside the glass walls, executives moved rapidly between conference rooms carrying laptops and legal folders. Nobody walked casually anymore. The entire floor had the atmosphere of a luxury ship after someone quietly discovered smoke below deck. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Councils splitting internally. Interesting. How bad? One side wants settlement before formal inquiry begins. And the other, they think they can contain you. Elena almost laughed at that. Containment. Such a corporate word. As if human beings were chemical spills. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen and immediately locked it. Too quickly. Elena. That was Martin. A pause. Yes? What does he want? Daniel hesitated long enough to make the answer obvious. He wants to know whether you've spoken to external counsel yet. There it was. Fear finally becoming visible. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Because once external attorneys entered the timeline, corporations lost control over narrative choreography. Every email became evidence. Every calendar invite became discoverable. Every late-night executive message transformed into potential courtroom dialogue. Elena closed the spreadsheet calmly. Tell him I'm considering my options. Daniel gave a dry, exhausted laugh. That sentence alone is going to ruin someone's morning. A sharp knock interrupted them. Before either could respond, Vivian Cross entered carrying a thin black folder. Her expression remained composed, but tension sharpened every movement she made. Conference room B, she said directly to Elena. Now. No greeting, no performance. Interesting again. Vivian placed the folder on the desk. Across the tab, in clean white lettering, were 4 words. Preliminary Retaliation Exposure Review. Daniel visibly inhaled, because the title meant something critical. This was no longer internal damage control. Legal had officially started documenting risk, and once lawyers began documenting executives instead of protecting them, careers died quietly behind closed doors. Vivian met Elena's eyes. There are things leadership failed to disclose to you. The hallway outside buzzed with hurried movement and muffled conversations. Somewhere farther down the executive floor, someone raised their voice before abruptly stopping. The building sounded different now, less like power, more like collapse trying to stay elegant. Elena stood slowly and picked up the black folder. Vivian stepped aside near the door, and for the first time since yesterday's firing, Elena noticed something unexpected in the senior attorney's expression. Not hostility, not caution, respect, which meant the balance inside the company had already started shifting. And somewhere above them, behind glass walls in emergency meetings, Martin Keller still had no idea. Someone inside his own organization had just handed Elena the document capable of ending everything. Conference room B had no windows. That was the first thing Elena noticed. Not the polished walnut table, not the expensive speaker system embedded into the ceiling, not the untouched bottles of imported water lined with perfect executive symmetry. No windows. Interesting choice for a meeting about transparency. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and stale espresso, the scent of corporations making desperate decisions before sunrise. Vivian Cross entered behind her and quietly closed the door. Click, a soft sound, but final. 2 other attorneys already sat inside reviewing documents illuminated by pale laptop screens. Neither looked up immediately, which told Elena they were trying very hard to appear calm. People performing calmness were rarely calm. On the center of the table rested a digital recorder. Official, visible, deliberate. Vivian took the chair across from Elena. This conversation is confidential and protected under preliminary legal assessment, she said. Meaning? Meaning we're trying to determine how catastrophic this becomes. Direct honesty. Unexpected. One of the attorneys finally spoke without lifting his eyes from the file. You retained external counsel? Not yet. The man nodded once, though the tension in his jaw suggested that answer brought only temporary relief. Vivian folded her hands carefully. Elena, before this proceeds further, legal needs clarity regarding the documents in your possession. You mean the documents leadership hoped disappeared? Silence settled heavily across the room. Not offended silence. Careful silence. The attorney beside Vivian adjusted his glasses. What exactly was your role in the escalation review process last quarter? There are 3 different answers to that question, Elena replied. The room stilled slightly. Explain. My official role. She raised one finger. My actual responsibilities. A second finger. And the responsibilities Martin Keller privately assigned when he needed problems handled quietly. No one interrupted. Outside the conference room walls, footsteps moved rapidly through the hallway. Phones rang non-stop somewhere nearby. The entire executive floor sounded like an airport during a storm delay. Controlled panic. Vivian slid a document across the table. Termination authorization. Signed electronically. Time-stamped. Elena studied it for exactly 3 seconds before noticing the issue. Then she smiled. Tiny. Dangerous. What? Vivian asked immediately. This signature was processed after the preservation notice. One attorney finally looked up sharply. You're certain? Elena turned the page around and pointed calmly. There. The room leaned closer almost simultaneously. The timestamp sat buried beneath metadata routing details most people would never notice. But Elena noticed everything. That was still their biggest mistake. The younger attorney swore softly under his breath before catching himself, because preservation notices change legal obligations instantly. After activation, deleting, altering, or processing retaliatory documentation became extraordinarily risky. Vivian's expression hardened. When did you see this? Right now. But you recognized it immediately. Yes. How? Elena leaned back slowly. Because Martin made the same mistake twice. That landed harder than she expected. One attorney actually removed his glasses completely now, rubbing his face with visible fatigue. The room suddenly felt less like an interview and more like triage. Vivian spoke carefully. Elena, there are concerns that certain executive communications may no longer exist in full. No, Elena corrected calmly. There are concerns someone thought they deleted them successfully. The silence after that sentence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then came the knock. 3 short taps. Urgent. Vivian opened the door halfway. Someone whispered rapidly from the hallway. Elena couldn't hear every word, but she caught enough. Board notified. Outside review. Media risk. Vivian's posture changed instantly. Not dramatically, just enough for experienced eyes to notice. The attorney closed the door again slower this time. What happened? Elena asked. Vivian remained standing for a second too long before answering. Martin Keller just attempted to suspend internal access logs. Daniel had been right. Fear. Pure fear now. One of the attorneys muttered, That's impossible. But nobody sounded convinced anymore. Vivian returned to the table. IT refused the request. Interesting. Very interesting. Because corporations only turned against CEOs under 2 conditions: financial collapse, or legal exposure severe enough to threaten everyone nearby. And judging by the atmosphere in the room, executives had started calculating survival independently. Elena, Vivian said quietly, I need a direct answer. Ask. How many people know what you have? Elena considered the question carefully, not because she lacked an answer, because precision mattered now. Enough to ensure nothing disappears. Again, silence. Again, heavy. The digital recorder's tiny red light blinked steadily in the center of the table like a heartbeat. Outside, morning sunlight finally broke through thinning clouds and spilled pale gold across the executive floor. Employees moved faster now, carrying folders, whispering in corners, avoiding eye contact with senior leadership. The building felt infected with rumor, and rumor inside corporations behaved like smoke, impossible to contain once it reached ventilation. Vivian opened another file, this one thinner, more dangerous. At the top sat a phrase that immediately sharpened the atmosphere inside the room. Potential executive retaliation sequence. Below it was a timeline. Elena's timeline. Meetings, reports, escalations, denials. And near the bottom, termination following protected objection. One attorney quietly closed his laptop. Not because the meeting was ending, because he already understood where this was going. Vivian watched Elena carefully. "There's something else you should know." The tone changed everything. Not procedural anymore. Personal. "Elena," Vivian continued softly, "Martin requested private access to your archive personnel records at 2:13 this morning." A cold stillness entered the room. Why? "We don't know." But Vivian's face suggested otherwise. Elena's mind moved rapidly through possibilities. Performance history, internal complaints, background checks, psychological evaluations, travel disclosures. Executives only searched old records when they needed leverage. Or dirt. The younger attorney finally spoke again. "If external counsel becomes involved, this timeline will become discoverable almost immediately." Translation: this company was running out of time. Vivian slid a business card across the table toward Elena. Not corporate, private firm, top-tier employment litigation. "Elena," she said quietly, "off the record, I strongly suggest you make a phone call before noon." There it was, the moment the walls shifted, because senior legal counsel had just unofficially advised a terminated executive to seek outside representation against her own company, which meant internal confidence had officially collapsed. Suddenly, raised voices erupted somewhere outside the conference room. Sharp, aggressive. One voice unmistakably belonged to Martin Keller. The second voice sounded like Daniel Reeves. Then came a sentence loud enough to cut through the walls. "You should have left her alone." The room froze. Every attorney inside looked toward the door instinctively. And Elena realized something extraordinary. The company wasn't preparing for battle anymore. The battle had already started. Martin Keller looked different in daylight. Not weaker, more exposed. The illusion had cracks now. From inside conference room B, Elena could hear fragments of the argument exploding down the executive corridor. Voices bounced sharply against glass walls and polished stone, stripped of the smooth executive polish normally performed for shareholders and cameras. "You bypassed protocol. Don't lecture me about protocol. Counsel warned you." Then silence, abrupt, dangerous, like a piano wire pulled too tight. Vivian stood first and opened the conference room door halfway. The executive floor outside had transformed into controlled chaos. Assistants froze beside desks, pretending not to stare. Analysts lingered near printers holding papers. They clearly stopped reading minutes ago. Someone from IT stood motionless beside the elevator, clutching a laptop like a shield. And near the center of the corridor stood Martin Keller. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect fury. His face carried the strained composure of a man still trying to act powerful, while the ground shifted beneath him. Daniel Reeves stood opposite him, equally rigid. Between them sat a single printed document in Martin's hand. Elena recognized it immediately. Legal hold confirmation. Martin noticed her standing behind Vivian. For one strange second, the entire floor seemed to stop breathing. No phones, no footsteps, nothing. Just the low mechanical hum of the building itself. Martin walked toward her slowly. Not rushed. That would have looked emotional. CEOs train themselves never to rush. But the closer he came, the more visible the damage became. Tiny things. The stiffness in his jaw. The faint discoloration beneath his eyes. The way his tie knot sat slightly off-center for the first time anyone could remember. Pressure. Real pressure now. "Elena," he said evenly, "I'd like a private conversation." Vivian answered before Elena could. "That won't happen." Martin didn't even look at her. "This doesn't concern you anymore." Vivian's expression cooled several degrees. "It concerns counsel, which means it concerns me exactly." The executive floor remained frozen around them. Nobody wanted to witness this. Everybody wanted to witness this. Martin finally turned toward Vivian with the slow restraint of someone actively suppressing rage. "You are overstepping." "No," she replied quietly. "You did." That landed hard, because several nearby employees immediately looked away. And in corporations, people only avoided eye contact when they sensed power changing hands. Martin shifted his attention back to Elena. "You've made your point." Interesting sentence. Not you're wrong. Not you misunderstood. "You've made your point." A subtle transition from denial to damage control. Elena folded her arms calmly. "I don't think I have yet." Something flickered behind Martin's eyes then. Fear again, but now mixed with calculation. A dangerous combination. He lowered his voice. "What exactly do you want?" There it was. The question executives asked only after realizing authority alone would no longer solve the problem. Elena studied him carefully. 20 years building a reputation, magazine covers, leadership summits, investor admiration, entire rooms trained to laugh half a second after his jokes, and now all of it balanced on invisible files moving silently through legal review servers upstairs. Funny how fragile empires became once documentation entered the conversation. Before Elena could answer, the elevator doors opened behind Martin. 3 people stepped out, 2 outside attorneys, and a woman carrying a slim silver case embossed with the logo of an independent compliance firm. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even Martin noticed. His posture stiffened. One of the attorneys approached Vivian directly. "We've been authorized by the board to begin preliminary assessment." Board authorization, not executive authorization. That distinction hit the hallway like cold water, because boards protected corporations, not CEOs. The attorney continued calmly. "Effective immediately. All executive communications, retention systems, archive devices, and discretionary deletion permissions are suspended pending review." Somewhere near reception, someone quietly whispered, "Holy hell." Martin's face lost color for the second time in less than 12 hours. Tiny details suddenly connected themselves inside Elena's mind. The anonymous file, her active badge, IT refusing Martin's request, legal splitting internally, the board moving before market open. This wasn't just panic anymore. This was containment of leadership itself. Daniel stepped closer beside Elena. Low voice, barely audible. He thought he still had time. "And now." Daniel watched Martin standing alone beneath the white executive lights, while attorneys quietly reorganized the entire power structure around him. "Now he's realizing the company may survive this," Daniel said softly, "but he may not." Across the floor, assistants began receiving calendar cancellations in real time. Phones buzzed endlessly. Meeting titles disappeared from conference room displays one after another. Emergency investor briefing? Canceled. Executive strategy review? Canceled. Leadership lunch? Canceled. The tower was shedding normalcy layer by layer. Martin suddenly stepped toward Elena again. Desperation leaked through this time despite his efforts. "You archived company property illegally." One of the outside attorneys turned immediately. "Do not say another word without counsel present." Too late. The sentence already hung in the air. Accusatory, retaliatory, documentable. Elena saw the exact moment Martin realized his mistake. Tiny, instant, irreversible. Vivian closed her eyes briefly like a surgeon watching someone cut the wrong artery. The outside attorney spoke again, sharper now. "Mr. Keller, you are no longer authorized to discuss personnel matters independently." Not advised, not recommended, no longer authorized. And suddenly, everyone nearby understood what that meant. The CEO had effectively lost control of his own building. Martin looked around the executive floor slowly. At the attorneys, at the assistants avoiding eye contact, at Daniel, at Vivian, at Elena. The silence surrounding him now felt completely different from the silence in yesterday's boardroom. Yesterday's silence obeyed him. Today's silence judged him. Outside the towering glass windows, morning sunlight finally broke fully across the city skyline. Gold reflected across wet rooftops and steel structures, bright enough to hurt tired eyes. A beautiful morning. Brutal timing. One of the board attorneys approached Elena carefully. Ms. Marin, independent counsel would like to request a formal meeting regarding your documentation. Professional, controlled, respectful. Another shift. Elena nodded once. Of course. Martin opened his mouth again, then stopped, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. And deep down, everyone on the executive floor knew the same thing now. The most dangerous moment hadn't been when Elena saved the email, or when legal opened the retaliation review, or even when the board intervened. No, the truly fatal moment happened much earlier. The second Martin Keller publicly told a composed, observant woman to pack her things in 5 minutes, without realizing she had already prepared for war.